This video might be a little more serious than most of the content I produce, but bear with me here. Ever heard of White Album 2? It's an anime adaptation that aired in the winter season of 2013 of a visual novel created by Studio Leaf under its publishing company Aqua Plus. In this day and age of overdone romantic comedy and harem anime, White Album 2 lies in the back as an undiscovered dark horse. To call it a rom-com, or label it the same way as many conventional anime of today with their cutesy fan-pandering tropes, actually does a great disservice to what is an incredibly well-thought-out drama. If you know me personally, I've pitched this specific anime to you enough that you're probably somewhat annoyed. So, along with the fact that most other prolific content creators like this fucking guy won't touch upon a gem like this, I've decided to create a review for myself to point to, instead of rehashing my pitch for White Album 2 over and over to every new person I meet. But first, before I actually start, I'm gonna have to say, don't watch the first White Album. The big 2 in front of the title would give you the impression that our subject matter is a sequel that should be watched after the original White Album. No. Do not do that. The scenario writer for the first White Album, as in both the original visual novel and the resulting anime adaptation for it, was done by Haruda Udaru, a greenhorn in the industry who would create White Album as only his second work, and the result was less than fantastic. I'm not here to cover specific details, but after making the mistake of going through the entirety of the first White Album myself, my thoughts are, there is no substantial plot or character development involved, and the main protagonist is a college version of Ito Matoko from School Days. He ignores his girlfriend and literally fucks every other female member of the cast repeatedly. Crunchyroll makes the mistake of having their anime list as such: White Album 2 and White Album 2, as in the second season of the awful first White Album. So there's your warning. But then, what is White Album 2's connection to the original? The only thing it shares with its predecessor is its name and music only. There are no connections story-wise, and the far superior scenario writing for White Album 2 was done by Fumiaki Makoto. Other productions he's had a hand in include Saekano, How to Raise a Boring Girlfriend, and Classroom Crisis. I happened to find a comment on my anime list about Fumiaki Makoto describing him as on the path to be as cancerous as Maeda Jun. Yeah, you know, co-founder of Key, guy behind Clanad, Angel Beats, Canon, Charlotte. I don't know if that's your cup of tea or not, but I mean, I guess it serves as a good point of reference, if anything else, as to whether or not you'll like or be put off by White Album 2. But moving on. I'm going to try and stay as spoiler-free as possible in this review, so I'll limit the scope of my in-depth analysis to most of the beginning, and let you enjoy the character development that occurs yourself. But to get straight to the point, White Album 2 is one of the most thoughtful and realistic depictions of human interpersonal relationships. It shows the problems that occur when the feelings and desires to be with another person conflicts with the interests of protecting those who you care about. It's a catch-22. The anime starts off by laying down its groundwork very transparently, along with a depiction of what is its own inevitable conclusion. 3 high schoolers, 1 boy and 2 girls, who become the closest of friends only for everything to fall apart between them as the story comes to an end. As a result of this, the viewer dynamic changes. In a large majority of cases, the audience continues watching due to not knowing what happens next. Here, the audience is set up to watch while more or less already knowing the conclusion. Instead of curiosity about the next event being our motivation, it's curiosity about how the conclusion that we already know of actually happens, and why it does so. Meet our male lead, Kitahara Haruki. Former student council president and prospective valedictorian of his senior class at the Hojo University's affiliated high school branch. The show takes a steady pace in establishing that Haruki is a high achiever, with a solid sense of integrity whose help and advice is sought after by many clubs and groups throughout his school, a steadfast ideal of what a righteous student should be. The show then begins with the initial premise of Haruki's personal desire to create a light music club to perform at the school festival during his final year of high school. This is how Haruki eventually gets involved with the 2 female leads, the sincere and friendly Ogizo Setsuna, and the introverted and cool Tolma Kazuza. There's no need to beat around the bush for this. The 3 get involved in a love triangle at the halfway point of the show, and And the show itself displays a strong self-awareness in that it knows you know, as an audience, that this will happen. The important part is the development each of the characters undergo on the way to this point. This will allow you to perceive for yourself that each of the three main characters are very human individuals. They all have their own respective desires and ambitions, they all have their own failures and problems that haunt them, and they all come to genuinely care for each other's well-being among the three of them. This is in stark contrast to what is usually the standard love dodecahedron trope in the anime industry, used for the purpose of instilling either pointless melodrama or minor comedy from the competition amongst a bunch of stock female characters fighting over a single dense black hole male. As an audience, you may very well come to relate with Haruki, Setsuna, and Kazusa. When they may do something wrong within the story, you are soon given the reason why, and though it may not necessarily justify the action itself, as a viewer, you are given the ability to understand why they did what they did, and the opportunity to sympathize with their situation in spite of what goes wrong. When the eventual fears and traumas of each character are revealed and interact, a contradiction is formed. The desires to be with one other person will cause them all to get hurt, but such a situation happens precisely because they're all so close with one another. None of them want any of the other three amongst them to be hurt from the bottom of their heart, but because it's unavoidable, each of them try to struggle desperately to keep their friendship from coming apart, and they suffer because of that. It's an incredibly human experience that speaks volumes about the relationships between people. Combine this with the powerful musical and seasonal symbolisms that this show champions, and the execution of this tale about heartfelt bonds frozen in a winter without end, waiting for the day when time will move for them again, truly makes White Album 2 shine as a masterpiece of a romantic drama. Now, if I had to rate the White Album 2 anime, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Wait, 8 out of 10? You'd think that considering all the praise I just gave the show, I'd at least throw a 9 out of 10 at it, if not a 10 out of 10. Musical pun entirely intended, this is a good segue into the main fault I find with this anime. As great of an experience the White Album 2 anime is, it is unfortunately an incomplete one. Allow me to explain. The original White Album 2 is a visual novel duology that comes in 3 parts, or potentially 4 or 5 depending on what additional content you consider as part of the main story. The first visual novel is a single part known as White Album 2 Introductory Chapter, and details the events that occur between Haruki, Setsuna, and Kazusa during their final year of high school. The second visual novel, called White Album 2 Closing Chapter, contains 2 parts along with what add-ons that people may consider as separate parts of their own. The first is the closing chapter, which occurs several years later during the cast's final year of college. The second is the coda. Continuing its theme of musical symbolism, a coda is a musical term that designates a separate passage that brings a piece or a movement to an end. For the sake of not spoiling anything, I'll pass over the plot content of the coda. And then you have the answer chapter and the mini after stories that Aqua Plus released separately for White Album 2, but whether you'd consider them as their own content or basic add-ons is up to you. Now, let's go back to the White Album 2 anime. It has a short runtime of 13 episodes, and only covers the introductory chapter. I'm not saying that the introductory chapter is bad. In fact, it's still a very strong story by itself. However, the introductory chapter is the setup for the true stage of White Album 2, and its closing chapter and coda, and the anime does not have the necessary number of episodes to cover it. When considering any rating at all, you have to look at why it doesn't deserve a perfect score. And White Album 2 unfortunately does not give you the full experience that it should because it's hampered by an inadequate runtime, which is why I want another fucking season! Having a decent understanding of Japanese, I managed to actually go through the entirety of the White Album 2 visual novel series, despite the fan translation for it being at a rather static level of progression. I'm looking at you, Bakasuki! And after finishing it, I would actually give it a 10 out of 10. No, that's not just because of the H scenes of the best girl, but that only returns us to the issue at hand. White Album 2, as great as it is, does not give you the complete closure because it doesn't cover all the source material. I would still absolutely recommend that you continue on and watch the White Album 2 anime in spite of this. However, it wouldn't be fair of me to tell you to do so without informing you of this problem. Perhaps someday, we'll be able to get another season of a show that truly shows a deeper and fulfilling depiction of humanity like White Album 2, instead of, you know, several new shows every season, like City
Skyno,
Blaze
Cavalon,
Skyno World
Duo.
Break, the same bullshit high school rom-com action battle anime that drastically decreased the lifespan of the already jaded Hayao Miyazaki with his hatred of the degenerate otaku industry. But in all seriousness, I wholeheartedly recommend White Album 2 to everyone. If you haven't already, please watch it. And if you have watched it and agree with what I've said here to some extent, I'd ask you to maybe spread this video around. Maybe it'll finally get the attention it needs for another season.